Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Rise of Privacy Tech, or TROPT Webcast. We at the Rise of Privacy Tech, our mission is to fuel privacy tech and innovation. And this month, we are publishing our follow-up white paper to last year's foundational white paper, where we defined and categorized and started to introduce a framework for categorizing the emerging privacy tech space. I'm really excited because we are releasing some of the interview recordings with leading privacy tech key players, and that is, no different today. I'm excited to welcome as an episode of the webcast Ketch's Head of Solutions and Marketing, Jonathan Joseph. Welcome to the webcast, Jonathan, and thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to your perspective, given that you've been building in this space and really focusing on this emerging privacy tech industry.
Hey, Lourdes, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course, my pleasure. I like to ask everyone this question for the benefit of the audience. I'd love to hear about your privacy origin story, in particular, your privacy tech origin story. What got you to this space? I mean, tech is such a broad area. How did you end up, working in privacy tech? Why privacy tech?
I think I took the scenic route to privacy. I started working with industries that were in disruption, basically.
What route is that? I missed it.
Yeah, I know. Right? You were right in there. So for example, we worked with a lot of newspapers who are facing secular shifts in their business as they kind of struggled to digitize as the world turned digital. And so we're always thinking about these industries that were going through major change. And then kind of in that process, I ended up at Crux, which was a data management platform. What's interesting about Crux is we actually had a consumer portal where you could go in and you could make choices about how your data was used. But nobody signed up. I think it was 1,200 people. And what we're seeing today is that the preconditions for consumers to make these choices are totally here. Brands should be doing it. And so that same kind of approach we took around data management, we're doing that in privacy. That's how I ended up there.
Wow. So you're absolutely right. It's like an inflection point. Basically, it started with the introduction of GDPR, right? Many privacy tech players kind of pay tribute to that as the reason of why they exist today. And it sounds like, that the introduction of global data protection laws, the changing customer demand for privacy for consumers and businesses in general, and just the investments in this space have kind of come together to make it possible for privacy tech companies like Ketch to exist. It sounds like, but you can correct me if I'm wrong if that's not true for your journey.
No, totally. And we think about it the same way. It's the regulations. And sometimes I wonder how much of it is chicken and egg, because consumers definitely care about it. And there's way more awareness than there was, say, 10 years ago. But it's the abuses on our data, I think, that really rose to the forefront. And it's interesting to look at that timeline and figure out if, were regulators responding to that? Were consumers responding to that? I think it all happened at the same time. I mean, Cambridge Analytica and then, McTaggart and Schrems, they all got in there, and we had GDPR, and now we have
Snowden. Yeah,
totally. How could I forget? Yeah, totally. So I think it's all those things.
Yeah, chicken or egg, I don't care. All I care about is that things are changing and changing for the good when it comes to privacy and privacy tech. And so you've worn this, like, several different hats. You've been an operator and builder, marketer in the space. And so I'm curious, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing for this emerging privacy tech industry? Like, what are some of those biggest challenges that you guys are seeing face to face that we need to overcome if we want to succeed in this industry?
One of the big challenges we're seeing is what we call the orchestration of consent. And consent, I kind of mean that broadly. I mean consumer permission, whether it's opt-in, opt-out, however it comes. So we see privacy tech players who collect consent. We see privacy tech players who, store consent. You can always have a record of it. But the part that I think is difficult is when a consumer makes a choice, how do you reflect that across all of your data systems, across third party, across first party? And sometimes we refer to this as the Tower of Babel problem. Everyone's speaking a different language. You're trying to send a consent signal to wherever, and I was on a call this morning, and there was so many frameworks.
Yes.
There's the IAB, and it's like, how do people keep track of all that? And so maybe we need some kind of standard. I know we're building a lot of that infrastructure, but I think that's a big problem. And then secondly, we're going through this shift where privacy was very much a legal challenge, and we responded to it in that way. And we responded to it, with a compliance hat on.
Right.
And for me, and I think I'm saying this not even as a tech person, right? I think I'm saying tech is the answer to some of the issues we're having around scalability and complexity in privacy. Like, just how do you deal with multiple jurisdictions? How do you deal with different data systems? Like, that's a deep tech problem. And you see some folks out there talking about, privacy being a data problem, and I'm totally all about that. And you're seeing it in the federal law, in the proposed federal law, a focus on data types, a focus on data systems, and kind of controlling data within those. I think that's huge. And as you pointed to earlier, Lourdes, the consumer's in the mix here, just adding another layer of complexity. Like, you almost can't just follow the laws. There's an idea that you manage your consumer expectation, and that's a huge undertaking as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you when you mentioned the shift to tech when it comes to privacy. I mean, that's the reason why I left privacy practice as a privacy lawyer and officer, and I'm focusing on the emerging privacy tech space, because you're right. Like, and we're not the only ones saying this. I was just interviewing Stuart from VMware, who's a chief privacy officer there, and one of the insights from that interview was, tech is going to help us scale, just like you were saying. It's not the solution to all privacy problems, but it's a solution to many of them, and it will help us scale our solution as opposed to relying on spreadsheets or other manual processes and policies. And so I'm with you on that. And I couldn't be more excited about that we have people like you also joining and focusing on the tech side of privacy. So what do you think you're talking about? You mentioned two big problems, right? You're talking about the orchestration of consent. What are some of the challenges? I guess the solutions to that challenge. One of them is standards, but I'm curious, like, how are you guys at Ketch trying to solve that on your own through technology?
Yeah, so for us, we've built a lot of the APIs and infrastructure that connect to third-party systems, so we can orchestrate consent. What we found there is, it's very different on the other end. There's folks who have privacy APIs, and it's easy. You just kind of use a privacy API. There's folks that don't, and we had to kind of tailor around that. It's almost, back to the Tower of Babel thing. It's you're finding this a language to communicate privacy preferences, and sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's really difficult. And so we've built that out, and I think we've covered something like 80% of people's tech stacks most of the time. We don't have every integration, but as our customers ask, we'll do that. We'll kind of add that on. So that's a huge piece. The other thing is, it's funny, you meet vendors and they have these different focuses, right? Like, I'm a CMP, or I do the DSR automation. And I think you just have to do all of it. Like, it's just, I don't know how you don't do all of it. And so I don't know what that means for our industry, right? But I think you have to have data discovery and classification. That's tied into consent management. You have to have not just the management of consent, but the management of preferences. Someone asked me if those two things are merging. They've already merged, right? Preferences and privacy just comes together. This idea that you always know what a consumer's preference is and privacy preferences, but you're able to orchestrate that across your systems. I think that's huge. And then just to get into like more automation, and not, like you said, you talked about spreadsheets, workflow tools, like that's, I think we're moving beyond that, right? We need automation that does the actual thing, doesn't just push tasks around a workflow.
Yeah, I love what you said about just making sure that the consent is flowed down to all systems. And so one of the things that come up in other interviews is, it's great, some of the solutions out there address APIs, And for instance, RingCentral CPO Paolo Zanni was saying, what about my legacy and proprietary systems? And so there's the gap that we still need to bridge in that area. And then on your second point about, you think we should just do all of it, that's actually reflecting buyer sentiment. Many buyers are saying they want a platform, but they also recognize that it's so early that it's hard to stick to one quote unquote platform when they might not do a good job in every single product category. And then on the third point that you said, the true automation, that's exactly another CPO I was just talking to is saying we just need more and more automation to scale. And this doesn't mean replacing headcount. It actually frees privacy pros to do the interesting work that can't be automated in the space. And so I'm curious, like, do any of these resonate with you? I'm just trying to bring in a lot of the insights I'm pulling from from other folks that I'm interviewing for this series.
No, absolutely. First of all, absolutely. I love it when it's framed that way.
Yeah.
This frees up lawyers to do more interesting work. It's not a headcount reduction thing.
No,
One of the things that fascinated me is, the IAPP does these benchmarking studies on the average cost of privacy programs. And I think last I looked, it was something like 2.7 million. And it was all people, and it was all travel, and it was consultants and external counsel and whatnot. But only 14% of it is tech.
Right.
And I'm thinking, if you think about the current number of regulations or jurisdictions where you have to comply, and it's 2.7 million on average, and you multiply that out by all the jurisdictions and countries that you have to comply with in the future, what do? You just multiply that 2.7 million, or do you actually make tech a bigger percentage of that number and solve for it that way? And like you said, free up lawyers to do more interesting stuff. We hear that a lot. I think if you're you went to law school, you didn't do that to fulfill a DSR.
No.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
No.
Yeah, that's obvious. No, so I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, the budget point is one of the things that we're really hammering on here at TROPT because when we're talking to different buyer personas, you're absolutely right. It's very hard, especially if the privacy function is under legal functions. Legal teams, lawyers are not used to buying tech products. They're used to buying services from big four, consulting firms and law firms, but they're not used to budgeting for technologies. And so that's one of the things that we're doing is really, and one of the things that we're going to cover in the white paper is really insights from leaders out there who have had to make the case for privacy budgets, some of the leaders in the privacy industry who know how to get that done and sharing that with others. And then the other point to that is that I've found that privacy engineering teams and other more technical teams like the CISO's organization have a bigger budget when it comes to privacy tech, because sometimes they write the check or part of the check, right? Sometimes the check's shared between IT and privacy and security.
Totally.
But
we're
it's a
seeing
fascinating
that.
space.
Yeah, it's privacy is a team sport, as we like to say, and about half the time you're absolutely right. It comes from the CIO, CTO budget. Whether the privacy function reports into there or not, I think that's some budget they're getting. The other interesting point, we're starting to see this actually more than what we saw last year, where the CMO is starting to get involved. And sometimes they're getting involved from a budget perspective, and sometimes they're just getting involved from an influence perspective. And so we did a study. One of the things we were really trying to get to was, do consumers care about privacy? Yes, they do. How do we get people to invest, brands to invest in privacy like they invest in sustainability, like they invest in diversity and inclusion, where it's a shared value with their consumers? And one of the places things we explored is, does revenue go up if you have responsible data practices? And we found that it does, and so we're going to continue to build on that study. But when we presented this at IAPP last week, people were taking photos of this one slide we had that said purchase intent goes up 23% if you have responsible data practices.
Yeah, please share that in the comments when we publish. If you send me a link, we'll share the data in the comments.
Oh, happy to. But I asked some folks, why I've never seen that, right? People start taking photos with their phone, like at this level. And I asked some folks, why were you doing that? And they said, I thought the answer was obvious, but they said, I use this to get budget.
Yep.
If I can use this, I start to unlock budget from different places. It could be the CMO's budget, it could be the CEO's budget, but it starts to become a business thing and a revenue thing rather than a compliance headache that you need budget to deal with, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
It's good.
Privacy has value beyond compliance.
We've always thought so, and it's just, I got to tell you, like a year and a half ago, I thought, does it? Like it didn't feel like it did. But now we're 100% behind it, absolutely. Because we talk about privacy as opportunity, and people say, come on, man. But it totally is, right?
You're a convert.
I'm a convert.
So one of the things that keep coming up, another thing that keeps coming up is, buyers are saying, we just want to make sure that privacy tech vendors are hearing our pain points. And so from your perspective, how do you guys ensure that the products that you're building and the features that you're adding are responsive to the day-to-day realities of buyer users? Because it seems to be one of the big pain points that many privacy tech buyer users share with us or have shared with us throughout this series.
Yeah, it's a great question. We're obviously in constant dialogue with our customers, and we're always kind of listening to see. Yeah, but it's more than that. I think the beauty of being a startup in this space is that we can respond quickly, but also we've built the infrastructure to be flexible. We've built the infrastructure to be, exactly like if the federal law starts talking about data types, okay, we've built in granular control of data. We can now assign a purpose and enforce that on location data as an example. But what we did, I think, a little differently is we laid out a vision for data stewardship. And brands are saying, yep, we want that. So we have this idea at Ketch that we're enabling businesses to be responsible stewards of data. And so we start there, right? And so people say, yeah, I'm all about that. And I kind of subscribe to that vision too. And then it's about, okay, well, what does that mean? And what do we have that fulfills that vision? And what don't we have? And so as we kind of went down that path, to give you an example, one of the things that all of our customers asked for was execution of their retention policy. And so, okay, we started to get this idea that what this is about is controlling data across its life cycle, from when you collect it, to how you use it and when you use it, to ultimately when you get rid of it. And so we found it's a data life cycle. And if you can control it across there, and then your clients will tell you, I've got that figured out, but I haven't got that quite figured out. And when we did a poll across our customers and we asked, what's the next thing you want to do? And almost all of them said, I want to execute my retention policy.
Yeah.
So that's
kudos to you guys for being very responsive to customer feedback. That's how you make the product work and better anyways, like the iteration and feedback from customers. And I'm with you. The retention piece is a big piece that many buyers in my network have been asking for years. And so it's exciting that you guys are building and responding to that by building a solution to retention, the retention pain point.
And Lourdes, just like kind of philosophically, right, with a startup,
right.
If you think that you've got your product designed and here's what we're going to do, here's the capability we're delivering. If you get 40% of that right, you're killing it. So we really come with this idea that we'll set the mission, we'll set the vision, but the product itself might change and morph based on what people want. And if we get 40% of that right, we're happy.
Right.
But you get to a point where you kind of get to a point where you have what most people want, and the market matures. And we've seen this happen in a number of different markets. Maybe we're in the early adoption cycle now, but later on we'll cross the chasm, if you will.
Yeah. So you guys participated in our review program. And the reason why we did that is really we heard buyers, and we also heard, folks from Ketch like you who want to know what buyers think. And so I'm curious, What was it like to get a review from a bona fide buyer versus a market analyst? And what's different this time? And were the questions different? Were
Oh yeah,
they a little bit too detailed or more philosophical? I'm curious what that was like for you. I was just a fly on the wall, and I'm no longer a
yeah.
buyer. I haven't been for 3 years, but I'm curious what it was like for you to do
Uh,
that.
we loved it. Best way to describe it is it felt real. You know,
Yeah,
it felt like it's just, I love the analyst calls as well. We've done a ton of those,
yeah,
but hey, press that button. Does that work? And you see, it seems to kind of like, okay. But it felt like when we talked to Kimberly that it was a real, I kind of need this for my own business. I need to solve a
hmm,
specific problem. Can you show me how that's done in a no nonsense way? So that was awesome. But also, she went deep. Like she could go
yeah,
deep, and it was almost, like, hey, is this kind of enough detail for you? We kept going down a couple of rabbit holes,
yeah,
if you remember,
yeah.
which we love doing that. I think that's what it's all about.
And I think it's reflective of her real pain points. She knew where to go because she lived those pain points in her day-to-day jobs, and which she's had for 20, 25 years as a buyer in the GRC privacy IT space. I'm curious, as someone who's building in the space, where would you like to see the future of privacy tech, or where do you see it going? And
Yeah,
then as a follow-up to that would be like, what's Ketch's role in that vision? Like, where do you see Ketch
yeah.
playing that role in
Oh,
that vision?
yeah. No, thanks for that question, Lourdes. And this might be a lofty goal, but we see privacy as the foundation for the next generation of the web. Really
Of
do.
course. Yeah.
You have to do it. It's a step you have to take. Responsibly gathered data, consumer permission, that's the default. And so we all need to be sensitive to consumer choices and people's choices around how their data is used. I think the brands that will win the game are the ones that lead with transparency and choice, but also build trust by making those choices so in their system and enforcing them.
Mhm.
I think privacy will merge. I'm starting to see this. It's merging with ethics, and it'll start to govern machine-to-machine communication. It will start to govern AI and machine learning. When humans are abstracted from the whole thing, there'll still be human data at the core of it. But we need those rules in place. And so this idea that we believe tech will support human flourishing, but to do that right, it needs to have the guardrails. It needs to have the communication protocols in place. And for Ketch, we see ourselves built into that data fabric. We call that's what we call ourselves. When we say our platform's trust by design, that's what we mean.
Oh,
Not
I
even
love
thinking
that.
about it, it just happens. Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more when it comes to privacy being foundational for the next stage of the internet. And you and I are not the only ones either. The builders of the next stage of the internet, Web3 and future technologies, the metaverse, are all thinking about privacy as we build new technologies. That said, there's a ton of privacy problems and privacy technical debt that still needs to be solved in Web 2, and I think that's where many of the products are building. But you're right, as we build the next stage and iteration of the internet, it's something that many of the builders are prioritizing, having learned from the things that we got wrong in the
Mhm.
current stage. And so I'm right with you. I feel like we could keep on talking forever, but I want to be mindful of your time. So if you're up for it, I'd love to do a quick round of lightning round of questions before we start to wrap up. What do you
Sure.
think?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, sounds fun. Sounds fun.
Awesome. Cool. When you're thinking about the future of privacy tech, you feel optimism or cynicism? Pick one.
Oh, absolutely optimistic. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Mhm.
I'm with you there. Um, what is one consumer privacy tech product that you use in your day-to-day life as just as a person, really? Like, what's one? And you don't have to give me a brand. You can just describe a tool that you use, a consumer privacy tech tool that you use.
I'm a big fan of kind of the browser tools, and just
Yeah,
I want to have control of my data, what gets used where. So anything that points to that is good for me. But also, and not to say I turn everything off. I want to
yeah,
understand the value exchange, right? So tools that
exactly.
say I'm using your data for this reason and I'm transparent. I love those.
Yeah, I love that. Same here. I use many of the browser tools that are privacy first, and some of them give rewards. So it's the value exchange that you're talking about. Aside from what Ketch is building, what is one privacy tech product, consumer or business, that you would like to see built that doesn't yet exist today? So if you could wave your wand, snap your fingers, what's one tool that you really want? What's on top of your wish list?
So you've heard of the personal data vault, right?
Yes.
And I think there's some of those out there. I think there's an evolution of that where it's almost like a permission vault, where I don't necessarily want to walk around with my data in a wallet. I think my data can stay where it is, but I'd like to be able to control it from a location. So if I can control permissions, I love some of those automated tools, by the way, like Consent-O-Matic that automate kind of what your privacy choices are, things like that. But this idea of a personal permission vault would be something I'd totally get behind.
I love that. That's actually a really cool idea. So if you guys aren't
just
building a Ketch, please do.
No, I think someone should get on that, right? That's a good one.
Yeah, maybe the Ketch team. And then last, before we start to wrap up, if we had, let's say you had a hypothetical billboard, what is one privacy message that you would like to share, assuming, let's say millions or billions of people are reading it? What's one privacy message that you feel compelled to share in that?
It's, it's an image, and I love the work that Apple's doing here, but there's that image when you kind of drive around San Francisco where they have a person and then they have basically, they're hiding behind their phone, right? Like there's this protective layer. And that as an image for me was so powerful. I remember kind of in an Uber driving through San Francisco and seeing that. I think getting consumers more behind this to really understand that they're in control here, but also at the same time that there's a data-driven economy, and data is a fuel for that. And I think those two things are totally compatible. And I think consumers understand that, and they've always understood it. Yeah,
and it also, to me, your response kind of evokes this image of, we're doing transacting online through browsers and apps, but let's not forget that there is a person behind that phone, right? Behind that transaction. And oftentimes we forget that just because we're doing online bank transactions now. When you go, we forget that before you had to go to a teller and there are two people there, the bank, one representing the bank, one the person. And so I love that image that you shared. So thank you for that. Jonathan.
Maybe the words are data dignity for all.
Yeah.
Something. We're coming up with the slogans here, Lourdes, and
bring them on. This has been such a pleasure, Jonathan, and so I want to, share with everyone. Please, pay attention to the work that privacy tech startups like Ketch is doing, really building trust by design into their platforms. So if you want to, find out about Ketch and Jonathan in particular, I'd love to invite you to share any calls to action that you might have. If you guys have any, white papers or where you want to be found, or any upcoming events that you want to share with the TROPT audience, please do share them with us, and we'll make sure to share links in the comments as well.
We'll do that. Thanks, Lourdes, of course. And I appreciate all the work you're doing in this space and in the ethical tech space. It's been inspiring. But no, you can find us at ketch.com. We'll be at IAPP Brussels as well. We've got some really good thought leadership around consumer perspectives of privacy. Believe it or not, I don't know if you knew this, Lourdes, but it's called the person behind the data. So there you go. And also a lot of work on the ROI of privacy. You can find all those pieces. We'll link you to them as well.
Love that. The ROI privacy is one of those areas that many privacy pros are really looking into. So thank you for that. So thanks everyone for tuning in. If you want to learn more about Ketch and Jonathan's insights, we have incorporated, many of those, including other leading privacy experts' insights into the white paper. We'll also share a link to that. And, check us out, TROPT and Ketch, at the TROPT Data Privacy Week 2023. We'll share a link to that as well. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure conversing with you today.
Thanks, Lourdes.